She didn't cheat. She didn't abandon her child. She didn't hurt anyone. Her only mistake was loving her husband more than herself. She gave up her nursing career. She built her life around her family. She trusted the man she married. And when the court stripped her of her daughter, they said it was for safety. 5 months later, a single image would prove just how wrong they were. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Nia Fletcher was 34 years old when her world began to collapse, though she didn't know it yet. She had been a registered nurse for 12 years, working long shifts, caring for patients who relied on her skill and compassion. She was good at her job, the kind of nurse who remembered patient names and stayed late when someone needed extra comfort. But when Sam, her husband, asked her to quit, she didn't hesitate for long. He told her that their daughter needed her mother at home full-time, that juggling work and family was taking a toll on all of them. He painted a picture of family dinners every night, homework help without rushing, a beautiful home where their daughter could thrive. Nia wanted that picture to be real, so she walked away from the career she'd spent over a decade building. Sam Fletcher seemed like the kind of husband women envied. He sold insurance policies for a living, bringing in income that kept them comfortable in their 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. He volunteered at community events, showing up with enthusiasm that made neighbors trust him instantly. On Saturdays, he coached Esther's soccer team, standing on the sidelines with a whistle around his neck and encouragement in his voice. From the outside, Sam looked like a man who had his priorities straight. Family first, always. People saw him at block parties with a cooler full of drinks and that easy smile that made everyone feel welcome. Nobody thought to question what happened when the door closed and the audience disappeared. Esther was 12 years old, the kind of kid teachers love to have in class. She turned in her homework on time, participated in discussions without being disruptive, and had a natural curiosity that made learning look effortless. Other parents commented on how polite she was, how well-behaved compared to their own children who threw tantrums and talked back. Esther had a group of close friends, played on the soccer team her father coached, and spent her free time reading books instead of staring at screens. She seemed happy, well-adjusted, loved. The Fletcher family checked every box on the list of what a functional family should look like. Sam's business trips started gradually, so gradually that Nia didn't notice the pattern at first. Twice a month became once a week, then twice a week, then so frequent she stopped keeping track. He explained that his company was expanding into new markets, that clients wanted face-to-face meetings to build trust before signing policies. He said the travel was temporary, just until things settled down, and the new territories were established. Nia believed him because she didn't have a reason not to, because 12 years of marriage had taught her that Sam was reliable and honest. She packed his suitcase, kissed him goodbye at the door, and waited for him to come home. But other changes came with the travel, small things that Nia noticed, but didn't want to analyze too closely. Sam switched colognes, trading the familiar scent he'd worn throughout their marriage for something sharper and more expensive. He joined a gym and started going before work, coming home with damp hair and flushed cheeks, talking about fitness goals he'd never cared about before. His wardrobe changed too. New shirts that fit differently, jeans that looked like they cost more than they should, shoes that were too stylish for a man who used to wear the same pair of sneakers until they fell apart. He started checking his phone constantly, glancing at the screen every few minutes, angling it away from her when notifications appeared. Esther started asking questions that Nia didn't know how to answer. One night at dinner, with Sam away on another trip, Esther looked up from her spaghetti and asked why Daddy was never home anymore. Nia fumbled for an explanation, something about work being really busy right now, about how adults sometimes have to travel for their jobs even when they don't want to. Esther didn't look convinced, her 12-year-old mind already capable of recognizing when grown-ups were lying to make her feel better. She stopped asking after that, learning what many children learn too early, that some questions make parents uncomfortable, and uncomfortable parents give worse answers than no answers at all. Late at night, when Sam was home, he stayed up long after Nia went to bed. She'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty, the glow of his laptop visible from the hallway. He said he was finishing work he didn't have time for during the day, catching up on emails and reports that couldn't wait. Naya wanted to believe him, but something about the way he closed the laptop when she walked into the room made her stomach tighten. She'd stand in the doorway, asking if he was coming to bed soon, and he'd nod without looking at her, his attention already back on the screen before she turned away. One Tuesday afternoon, Nia ran into Mrs. Lindsay from 3 houses down at the grocery store. They made small talk in the produce section, discussing the best way to pick ripe avocados and whether the sale on chicken was worth the limit of 2 per customer. Then Mrs. Lindsay mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd seen Sam at that new Italian restaurant downtown the previous weekend. She said he was with a beautiful woman, laughing over wine and pasta, looking happy. Mrs. Lindsay laughed when she said it, a light sound that suggested she thought nothing of it, probably assumed it was a work colleague or an old friend. Nia laughed too, a sound that came out hollow and forced, agreeing that it must have been a work thing. But the seed was planted. Nia went home and put away the groceries absent-mindedly, her mind replaying Mrs. Lindsay's words. A beautiful woman, laughing, looking happy. She told herself it meant nothing, that Sam had every right to have dinner with colleagues, that she was being paranoid. But the doubt had taken root, and once you start questioning, stopping becomes nearly impossible. She thought about asking Sam about it, but what would she say? Your neighbor saw you at a restaurant with a woman and I'm worried you're cheating on me. It sounded absurd, the kind of accusation that would make her look insecure and jealous. Sam became more distant in ways that went beyond just physical absence. When he was home, he felt like a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. He snapped at Nia over things that never bothered him before, forgetting to buy his favorite coffee, leaving a dish in the sink, asking too many questions about his day. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt like pulling teeth. Every question met with one-word answers or irritated sighs. He stopped touching her casually. No more hand on her back when he walked past. No more quick kisses before leaving the house. At night, he turned away from her in bed, claiming he was tired, claiming work was stressful, claiming he just needed space. Nia blamed herself for all of it. She looked in the mirror and wondered if she'd let herself go, if staying home had made her boring, if Sam was losing interest because she wasn't interesting anymore. She tried harder, buying new clothes even though they rarely went anywhere that required dressing up. She experimented with new hairstyles, watching YouTube tutorials and attempting styles she'd never tried before. She cooked his favorite meals, the ones that used to make him compliment her cooking, but he barely noticed. When she asked about his day, trying to show interest in his life, he acted like her questions were an intrusion, like she was demanding something he didn't want to give. Before you go any further, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with someone who needs to hear stories like this. Your support keeps this channel going and helps us bring more truth to light. Now, let's continue. And now, we shift our focus to someone else who played a critical role in this story. Her name? Leslie Carmine. Leslie walked into the hotel bar in Miami wearing a dress that cost more than most people's rent. She was 29 years old, with the kind of beauty that made men stupid and women suspicious. Her hair fell in perfect waves down her back. Her makeup was flawless without looking like she was trying too hard, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what power she held. She'd introduced herself to people at the conference as a model and influencer, the kind of woman who posted carefully curated photos online and talked vaguely about brand partnerships and business opportunities. But Leslie wasn't a model in any real sense, and the business she was really in had nothing to do with fashion or social media. Her real name wasn't Leslie Carmine. That was just the latest identity in a long line of fabricated personas, each one designed to serve a specific purpose before being discarded. She'd been Leslie Morton in Nevada 2 years ago, working a different angle with a different target. Before that, she was Carmine Baptiste in Texas, and before that, Lara Selleck in Florida. Each name came with a backstory, a set of references that checked out if you didn't look too hard, and a smile that made people want to believe whatever she told them. Leslie was good at being whoever she needed to be, at reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted until it was too late to realize they'd been played. She had a criminal record from when she was younger, back when she competed in beauty pageants and learned how to manipulate judges with the right combination of charm and vulnerability. The pageant circuit taught her valuable lessons about presentation, about making people see what you wanted them to see instead of what was really there. But pageants weren't profitable enough for someone with Leslie's ambitions. She wanted real money, the kind that came from taking risks and getting her hands dirty. So she found her way into a different kind of business, one that operated in shadows and preyed on people who wouldn't be missed. 3 women had gone missing across 2 states in the past 3 years, all of them connected to Leslie in ways that investigators hadn't quite proven yet. The first was a single mother in Nevada who'd been struggling to make ends meet, desperate enough to trust a woman who offered her a modeling opportunity. The second was a runaway in Texas who thought she'd found someone who understood her. The third was a girl in Florida with no family and no one looking for her. All 3 disappeared quietly, their cases marked as voluntary missing persons, their files gathering dust in police databases. Leslie knew how to pick targets who wouldn't generate headlines, women whose absence would cause minimal disruption. But Leslie was smart enough to know that pattern needed to change, that authorities would eventually connect the dots if she kept operating the same way. She needed a new approach, something that would give her cover while also generating more profit. That's when she shifted her focus from vulnerable women with no resources to a different kind of target. Men with families, men with something to lose, men who could be manipulated into doing exactly what she needed. Sam Fletcher was perfect the moment she laid eyes on him. She'd spent 3 weeks researching him before the conference, scrolling through his social media, learning about his job and his family and his life. He was 37, married for 12 years, father to a daughter, working a job that paid well enough, but probably left him feeling like he should have accomplished more by now. He posted photos from community events and soccer games, the kind of content that screamed, "Look at my perfect life," which usually meant the person posting was desperately trying to convince themselves it was true. Sam had all the markers of a man approaching 40 and feeling the weight of roads not taken, opportunities not seized, youth slipping away. Leslie approached him at the hotel bar on the second night of the conference. She'd watched him earlier that day during one of the panel discussions, saw the way he checked his phone constantly, saw the way he looked around the room like he was searching for something more interesting than insurance policy presentations. She waited until he was alone, nursing a drink and looking bored, before sliding onto the stool next to him. She ordered her own drink, made casual conversation about how dry the conference sessions were, laughed at his complaints about industry regulations. She touched his arm when she talked, let her hand linger just long enough to be noticed, asked questions about his life that made him feel interesting. Sam was hooked within an hour. Leslie could see it in the way he leaned toward her when she spoke, the way his eyes stayed on her face instead of wandering around the room, the way he ordered another drink even though he'd probably planned to go back to his room after the first one. She told him she was in Miami for the conference, but really, she was building her brand, working with photographers and companies who wanted to partner with her. It was all lies, but the lies were believable because she delivered them with confidence. Sam believed her because men like Sam wanted to believe that a woman like Leslie would be interested in them. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged phone numbers. Leslie made sure to program her contact information into his phone herself, adding a photo that would pop up when she called. She told him it was great meeting someone real at a conference full of boring people, that he should text her if he ever wanted to grab a drink and complain about the industry. Sam agreed, probably thinking it was harmless, just networking, just a friendly contact. He went back to his room and Leslie went back to hers, satisfied that the first hook was set. The texting started the next day. Leslie sent him a message thanking him for the conversation, saying it made the conference bearable. Sam responded within minutes, and they fell into an easy rhythm of back-and-forth messages throughout the day. Leslie was careful to keep things light at first, asking about his sessions, making jokes about bad hotel coffee, building rapport without pushing too hard. She knew how to pace these things, how to make a man feel like he was the one pursuing her when really she was the one pulling all the strings. By the end of the week, their messages had shifted from friendly to flirtatious. Leslie complimented him, told him he was funnier than he gave himself credit for, said she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation at the bar. Sam responded to every message, staying up later than he should have, hiding his phone from Nia when notifications came through. He told himself it was innocent, just a friendship, just someone who appreciated him in ways his wife didn't anymore. But he was lying to himself, and Leslie knew it. By the end of the month, Sam had made excuses to travel to Miami again, claiming it was for work, when really it was to see Leslie. They met at a different hotel, one where no one from his company would recognize him. Leslie wore another expensive dress and greeted him with a hug that lasted too long, her perfume filling his senses and clouding his judgment. They had dinner, then drinks, then ended up in her hotel room where the affair officially began. Sam drove home the next day feeling guilty and exhilarated in equal measure, already planning when he could see her again. The affair escalated faster than Sam expected. What started as one stolen weekend became 2, then 3, then standing trips that happened every other week. Hotel rooms in different cities, always paid for in cash so there was no credit card trail. Secret getaways where Sam told Nia he had client meetings when really he was lying in bed with Leslie, listening to her talk about the life they could have together. Explicit messages that appeared and disappeared from his phone. Sam deleting them immediately, without realizing Leslie was keeping screenshots of everything. Because that's what Leslie did. She collected evidence, built files, prepared for the moment when she would need leverage. She took photos of them together, recorded conversations without his knowledge, saved every text message and email. She was building insurance, making sure that if Sam ever tried to walk away or betray her, she'd have enough ammunition to destroy him. But Sam didn't know that. He thought Leslie loved him, thought what they had was real, thought he'd finally found someone who understood him. 6 months into the affair, Leslie decided it was time to make her real move. She met Sam at their usual hotel, but this time, instead of greeting him with her usual enthusiasm, she seemed distant and sad. Sam noticed immediately, asking what was wrong, worried he'd done something to upset her. Leslie took a deep breath, let her eyes fill with tears, and told him she couldn't do this anymore. She said the sneaking around was destroying her, that she felt like she was living a lie, that she deserved more than being someone's secret. Sam panicked. He'd expected to have this affair on his own terms, to keep his family intact while also keeping Leslie. He hadn't prepared for her to push back, to demand more. He tried to calm her down, told her they could work it out, asked what she needed. Leslie shook her head, said what she needed was a real relationship, not stolen hours in hotel rooms. She needed him to choose, her or his wife. She couldn't keep sharing him, couldn't keep pretending she was okay with being the other woman. Sam felt trapped. He had a daughter he loved, a home he'd built, a life that looked good, even if it felt hollow. Walking away from all of that seemed impossible. But Leslie was crying now, telling him she loved him but couldn't do this anymore, that she needed to know if he loved her enough to choose her. Sam tried to explain that it was complicated, that he couldn't just blow up his family, that Esther needed both her parents. Leslie's tears stopped abruptly. She looked at him with something close to contempt and said she understood. He wanted his perfect little life, and her on the side, wanted to use her until he got bored and moved on. That accusation stung because part of it was true. Sam had been having his cake and eating it too, getting the excitement of an affair without the consequences of leaving his marriage. But hearing Leslie say it out loud made him feel small and selfish and desperate to prove he cared about her. He reached for her, tried to pull her close, promised he wasn't using her. Leslie pulled away, said she deserved someone who would commit to her fully, that she was done being someone's backup plan. Sam begged her not to leave. He said he'd figure it out, that he just needed time to think about how to handle things. Leslie stood up, gathering her things like she was done with the conversation. That's when Sam said the words she'd been waiting for. He'd do it. He'd leave Nia. He'd file for divorce. He just needed to figure out how to make sure he got custody of Esther, because he couldn't lose his daughter in the process. Leslie sat back down, her expression softening like she was considering his words carefully. She asked how he planned to get custody when Nia was Esther's primary caregiver, when she'd been home with their daughter for years while he traveled for work. Sam admitted he didn't know, that custody battles usually favored mothers, that Nia would probably fight to keep Esther. Leslie nodded, looking thoughtful, and then said something that would change everything. She said Nia didn't work. She said Nia had no income, no independence, no life outside of being a wife and mother. She said that made Nia dependent, maybe even unstable. Sam pushed back immediately, said Nia was a registered nurse who could return to work anytime she wanted, that she wasn't helpless or unstable. Leslie leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial, and asked a simple question. What if Nia looked unstable? What if there was evidence that she wasn't fit to care for a child? Sam didn't understand at first. Leslie spelled it out. She said Sam should install cameras in the house, document Nia's behavior, create a pattern that looked concerning. She said he should provoke Nia, make her react emotionally, capture those reactions on video. She said he should build a case that showed Nia was volatile, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Then, when the time was right, he could file for divorce and use the evidence to take full custody. The plan was cruel and detailed and obviously wrong. Sam knew that. He sat there in the hotel room, looking at this beautiful woman who was laying out instructions for how to destroy his wife, and he knew he should walk away. He should go home, confess the affair, deal with the consequences like a man. But Sam didn't do that. He thought about Leslie threatening to leave him. He thought about how good she made him feel, how alive, how young. He thought about Esther, about keeping his daughter, about not losing everything in a messy divorce, and he made the wrong choice. Sam bought the cameras online, paying with cash at a convenience store to buy prepaid credit cards so the purchase wouldn't show up on his regular statements. He chose small models, the kind advertised for home security, that could be hidden easily and controlled through an app on his phone. The package arrived on a Tuesday when Nia was grocery shopping, and Sam signed for it himself, taking it straight to his car so she wouldn't see it when she got home. He spent that afternoon at a coffee shop near his office, reading the instructions and downloading the app, making sure he understood how everything worked before attempting the installation. The setup was simpler than he expected. Each camera had a magnetic base that could attach to metal surfaces or adhesive backing for walls and ceilings. The app walked him through connecting each camera to their home Wi-Fi network, testing the video quality, adjusting the angles. Sam practiced in his car, mounting and unmounting the cameras, making sure he could do it quickly when the time came. He felt sick the entire time, a knot in his stomach that tightened every time he thought about what he was really doing. But he didn't stop. Thursday afternoon, Nia mentioned she was taking Esther to the dentist after school, and then they'd probably grab dinner since she hadn't planned anything for that night. Sam saw his opportunity. He told her he'd work from home that day, maybe catch up on some reports. Nia seemed pleased, probably happy that he'd be home instead of traveling for once. She kissed him goodbye when she left with Esther, told him there was leftover chicken in the fridge if he got hungry. Sam waited until their car disappeared down the street before pulling the cameras from his laptop bag. He started in the living room, climbing on a chair to reach the smoke detector near the ceiling. He unscrewed the cover, placed the first camera inside at an angle that would capture most of the room, then carefully replaced the cover. From the ground, you couldn't tell anything had changed. He tested it on his phone, watching the live feed, adjusting slightly until he could see the entire couch, the doorway, and part of the hallway. Perfect. The second camera was tucked behind a decorative sign Nia had hung near the ceiling that read, "Gather," in cursive letters. Sam had always thought the sign was pointless and ugly, but now he was grateful for it because it provided perfect camouflage. He wedged the camera behind the sign's frame, angled down toward the table and counters where Nia spent most of her time. He checked the phone again, saw the Kit Lindsay in clear detail, adjusted the angle slightly to capture more of the room. Another success. The passage camera was trickier because there weren't many places to hide it without being obvious. Sam ended up placing it on top of a bookshelf, angled down toward Esther's bedroom door and the bathroom. He surrounded it with picture frames and a small plant, making it look like just another object on a crowded shelf. From most angles, you'd never notice it unless you were specifically looking. He tested it, watched the hallway appear on his phone screen, nodded to himself. The bedroom camera was the one that made him feel the worst. This was the room where he and Nia slept, where they'd shared 12 years of marriage, where Esther had been conceived. Installing a surveillance camera here felt like the final betrayal, crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But he did it anyway. He replaced the existing smoke detector with one of the camera models designed to look exactly like a smoke detector, complete with a blinking red light that made it seem legitimate. The camera lens was hidden in the design, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Sam stood on the bed to reach the ceiling mount, his hands shaking slightly as he secured it in place. When Nia and Esther got home 2 hours later, Sam was sitting at the Kit Lindsay table with his laptop open, looking exactly like a man who'd spent the afternoon working. Esther bounded in, talking about how the dentist said she had no cavities, and they'd gone to her favorite burger place for dinner. Nia looked relaxed and happy, asking Sam about his day, saying she was glad he got to work from home for once. Sam smiled and lied, said he'd been productive, that working from the house was nice. Nia kissed his forehead and went to put away leftovers. Sam watched her move around, knowing the camera behind the sign was recording every movement. That night, after everyone was asleep, Sam locked himself in the bathroom and opened the app on his phone. He scrolled through the recorded footage, watching hours of empty rooms and normal household activities. There was nothing incriminating, nothing useful. Just Nia doing laundry, making lunch, sitting on the couch reading a book. Just Esther doing homework, getting a snack from the fridge, playing with their dog in the hallway. Just a normal family on a normal day. The cameras worked, but they weren't capturing anything that would help his case. Sam called Leslie. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and encouraging. He told her the cameras were installed, but that Nia wasn't doing anything wrong, wasn't giving him anything to work with. Leslie laughed, said of course Nia wasn't giving him anything yet because he hadn't started pushing. She reminded him that the point wasn't to catch Nia being unstable, the point was to make her unstable and then catch it. Sam knew that, but hearing it said so plainly made his stomach turn. Leslie asked if he was having second thoughts. Sam said no, said he just needed to know what to do next. Leslie told him to start small, to test the waters, to see how Nia responded to pressure. The next week, Sam started implementing small cruelties, testing boundaries, seeing what it would take to make Nia crack. On Monday, Nia mentioned she'd picked up his dry cleaning like he'd asked, hanging the shirts in his closet already. Sam looked at the shirts, picked one at random, and said this wasn't the right one. Nia looked confused, said she'd picked up everything the ticket listed. Sam said she must have forgotten something, that he specifically needed the blue shirt for a meeting, and now he'd have to wear something else. Nia apologized, said she could go back and check, but Sam waved her off with obvious irritation. He watched her face fall, saw the way she blamed herself for a mistake she didn't make, and felt nothing. On Tuesday, Nia made chicken for dinner because she'd found a new recipe she thought he'd like. She'd spent the afternoon preparing it, marinating the meat and making sides from scratch. Sam took one bite and said he was tired of chicken, that they'd had it 3 times in the past 2 weeks, that she needed to be more creative with meals. Nia looked hurt, pointing out that he usually requested chicken, that she was just trying to make what he liked. Sam shrugged, said preferences change, finished eating in silence. Nia barely touched her own food, too upset to have an appetite. On Wednesday, Nia tried to initiate a conversation about their upcoming anniversary, asking if he wanted to plan something special or maybe just go to dinner. Sam told her he didn't have time to think about anniversaries right now, that work was too stressful to plan personal events. Nia said they didn't have to do anything elaborate, just something to mark the day. Sam snapped at her, said she wasn't listening, that he'd just told her he was too busy. Nia flinched at his tone, apologized quietly, and didn't bring it up again. Thursday night, Sam stayed out until midnight, without calling or texting to let Nia know where he was. She tried his phone multiple times, each call going to voicemail, each text going unanswered. When he finally came home, she was sitting on the couch looking worried and exhausted. She asked where he'd been, said she'd been worried something happened. Sam told her he'd been at a work dinner that ran late, that he didn't realize he needed to check in like a teenager with a curfew. Nia said she wasn't trying to control him, she just wanted to know he was safe. Sam walked past her without responding, went straight to bed. This pattern continued for 3 weeks. Sam found new ways to be cruel every day, new buttons to push, new ways to make Nia feel small and wrong and inadequate. He criticized the way she folded laundry. He complained about the house being too cold, then too hot, then too cold again. He ignored her questions about his day, answered in grunts and single words, acted like her presence was an annoyance. He picked fights in front of Esther, knowing it would make both of them uncomfortable, knowing it would add to the stress. Nia tried everything to fix whatever was wrong. She made his favorite meals more often, bought the specific brand of coffee he preferred, kept the house cleaner than it had ever been. She tried to give him space when he seemed irritated, tried to engage him when he seemed distant, tried to figure out what he needed from her. But nothing worked because nothing could work. Sam wasn't upset about anything Nia was or wasn't doing. He was manufacturing problems, creating conflict where none existed, pushing her toward a breaking point. Esther started having nightmares more frequently. She'd wake up crying, saying she dreamed about her parents fighting, about her family falling apart, about being alone. Nia held her daughter those nights, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances that felt more hollow each time. During the day, Esther was quieter than usual, spending more time in her room with the door closed, avoiding common areas where she might witness another tense interaction between her parents. She stopped talking as much during dinner, stopped asking questions, stopped being the bright, engaged kid she'd always been. The stress was affecting her, and neither parent seemed to notice because they were too wrapped up in their own drama. The neighbors definitely noticed something was off. Mrs. Lindsay from down the street saw Sam leaving the house at odd hours, saw Nia looking pale and tired during school pickup, heard raised voices through the walls on more than one occasion. She asked Nia about it one day, gently inquiring if everything was okay at home. Nia forced a smile and said it was just stress, just work pressures affecting Sam, nothing serious. Mrs. Lindsay wanted to push further but could see that Nia wasn't ready to talk, so she let it drop. But she remembered the conversation, filed it away for future reference, wondered if she should be more concerned. After 3 weeks of documented footage showing nothing useful, Sam was getting frustrated. He called Leslie to complain, said Nia was taking the abuse without fighting back, that she just kept apologizing and trying harder instead of snapping. Leslie sounded frustrated too. She said Sam was being too gentle, that mean comments and cold shoulders weren't enough. She said he needed to do something bigger, something that would hurt Nia so deeply she couldn't help but react. She said they needed evidence of Nia being violent or out of control, not just sad and confused. Sam asked what she had in mind. Leslie's voice changed, became more intense, more focused. She said it was time to use the photo they'd discussed, an image so painful, so personal, so devastating that Nia would have no choice but to break. Sam hesitated, said that felt too far, too cruel. Leslie's patience snapped. She said Sam had already crossed the line the moment he installed those cameras, that he'd already committed to destroying his wife, that getting squeamish now made no sense. She said if Sam wanted to keep Esther, if he wanted to be with her, then he needed to stop being weak and finish what he'd started. Sam sat in his car in an empty parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, listening to Leslie lay out the plan for the AI-generated photo. It would show Sam in an intimate embrace with a woman, close and romantic and unmistakably involved. It would look real because AI had gotten that good, good enough to fool anyone who wasn't specifically looking for digital artifacts. Sam would send it to Nia with a message that made it seem like he was confessing, like he'd been caught and was trying to apologize. The photo would break Nia's heart, and when it did, she'd react, and the cameras would capture everything. Sam knew this was the point of no return. Up until now, he could claim he was just going through a rough patch, that marriages have ups and downs, that he hadn't really done anything unforgivable. But sending this photo, using this lie, weaponizing Nia's trust against her in such a personal way, there would be no coming back from that. He would officially be the villain in this story, the husband who destroyed his wife on purpose. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, phone still in his hand, trying to decide if he could really do this. Then he thought about Leslie leaving him. He thought about losing the affair, losing the way she made him feel, losing the escape she provided from his boring life. He thought about Esther growing up to resent him if he lost custody, about being reduced to every other weekend visits and child support payments. He thought about his life falling apart in ways he couldn't control. And he made his choice. He worked with Leslie to create the image over a series of video calls, using an AI program she'd already researched and tested. They uploaded photos of themselves, adjusted settings, let the program generate dozens of options until they found one that looked perfect. The final image showed Sam and Leslie sitting close together on a couch, his arm around her shoulders, her head leaning into him, both of them smiling in a way that suggested intimacy and comfort, and something more than friendship. It looked real because the AI made it look real, capturing lighting and shadows and details that a casual observer would never question. Sam saved the image to his phone. He drafted the message a dozen times, trying to find the right words, the right tone, the right balance between apology and admission. He finally settled on something simple. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Short enough to be believable, vague enough to let Nia's imagination fill in the gaps, apologetic enough to seem like genuine remorse. It was a perfect lie, wrapped in just enough truth to make it hurt. On Thursday afternoon, Nia was folding laundry in the bedroom when Sam sent the message. He was at work, sitting at his desk, heart pounding as he hit send. He opened the camera app on his phone, switching to the bedroom feed, watching in real time as Nia picked up her phone and saw his name on the screen. He watched her open the message, watched the image load on her screen, watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing. Nia stared at the photo for 10 seconds without moving. Then she dropped the laundry basket. Her hands started shaking. She sat down on the floor, phone still in her hand, eyes locked on the image of her husband with another woman. Sam watched through the camera as his wife's world collapsed. He saw her face crumble, saw tears start falling, saw her bring a hand to her mouth like she might be sick. He watched her sit there for over an hour, just staring at the photo, occasionally letting out a sob that the camera audio picked up clearly. When Sam got home that evening, Nia was waiting for him in the living room. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her hands were still shaking. She stood when he walked through the door, holding her phone out like it was evidence in a trial. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she asked him about the photo. She asked who the woman was. She asked how long this had been going on. She asked why he would do this to their family. And Sam, following the script Leslie had given him, acted confused. He looked at the phone screen, frowned like he didn't understand, said he didn't send her any photo. Nia's voice got louder, more desperate. She said she could see his number right there, could see the message came from him. Sam shook his head, said someone must have hacked his phone, said he didn't know what she was talking about. He said maybe she was seeing things, maybe she was stressed and confused. He suggested she sit down, maybe have some water, maybe call a friend to talk through whatever was upsetting her. That's when Nia snapped. She threw the phone at him with force she didn't know she had. It hit the wall next to his head and shattered, pieces of glass and plastic scattering across the floor. She screamed at him, called him a liar, demanded he stop pretending. She crossed the room and grabbed his shirt, shaking him, begging him to tell her the truth. She was crying and yelling and falling apart in exactly the way Sam had planned, and he just stood there looking calm and concerned and slightly afraid. He raised his hands in a defensive gesture, backed away slowly, made himself look like the victim instead of the perpetrator. Esther heard her mother screaming from her bedroom. She opened her door and saw her mom grabbing her dad, saw broken phone pieces on the floor, saw her family imploding. She was terrified. She'd never seen her mother like this, had never witnessed such raw emotion and desperation. She ran back to her room and locked the door, diving under her blanket and covering her ears, trying to block out the sound of her mother's voice breaking. Sam pulled his phone from his pocket, keeping his movements slow and deliberate like he was dealing with a dangerous person. He dialed 911. When the operator answered, his voice was steady and concerned. He said his wife was having some kind of violent episode. He said she'd thrown something at him, that she was becoming aggressive, that his daughter was in the house and he was worried for her safety. He gave his address. He answered the operator's questions calmly. He played the role of concerned husband perfectly. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 officers knocked on the door and Sam answered, his expression grateful and relieved. He explained that his wife had become violent, that she'd thrown her phone at him and grabbed him aggressively. He showed them the shattered phone pieces still scattered on the floor. He said he was worried about their daughter, worried about what might have happened if he hadn't called. The officers looked past him into the house and saw Nia on the couch, face in her hands, crying uncontrollably. One officer approached Nia and asked her to explain what happened. She tried. She told them about the photo, about her husband's affair, about how he was lying and gaslighting her. But she was hysterical, her words coming out jumbled and incoherent between sobs. She said Sam sent her a photo with another woman, but Sam was saying he didn't, and the photo was on her broken phone, so she couldn't even show them now. She said he'd been cruel to her for weeks, that he was trying to make her crazy. She said this was all planned, all a setup, but she couldn't explain how or why in a way that made sense. The officers looked at Sam, who stood calmly with his hands in his pockets, looking worried but composed. Then they looked back at Nia, who was falling apart in front of them, unable to form coherent sentences, clearly in emotional distress. The contrast was obvious. One person looked stable and concerned. The other looked unstable and dangerous. The senior officer asked Sam if he wanted to press charges. Sam hesitated, like he was considering it, then said no. He said his wife was just going through something, that she needed help, that he didn't want to make things worse. He said he just wanted to make sure everyone was safe. The officer nodded, seemed to appreciate Sam's restraint. But he said they still needed to take Nia into custody for the night. Standard procedure in domestic disturbance calls involving violence. He said it would give everyone time to cool down, time to figure out next steps. Nia looked up when she heard that, confusion and fear crossing her face. She said she didn't understand, said she wasn't the one who did something wrong. The officer said he understood she was upset, but throwing objects and grabbing someone constituted assault, even in a domestic situation. He said it was for everyone's safety, including hers. He pulled out handcuffs and asked her to stand up. Nia couldn't believe this was happening. She stood on shaking legs and let the officer cuff her hands behind her back. She looked at Sam, searching his face for any sign of the man she'd married, any indication that he felt remorse for what he was doing to her. But Sam's face was blank, carefully neutral, giving nothing away. He watched his wife being led out of their home in handcuffs without saying a word. Nia spent the night in a holding cell with 3 other women, none of whom spoke to her. She sat on a metal bench bolted to the wall, still wearing the clothes she'd been arrested in, her mind replaying the evening on an endless loop. But morning came, and she was still in the cell. An officer brought her paperwork to sign, explained that she was being released on her own recognizance but would need to appear in court in 2 weeks. He handed her a document that made her stomach drop, a temporary restraining order. She was prohibited from returning to her house, from contacting Sam directly, from being within 500 feet of him or Esther. She read the words 3 times before they made sense. She couldn't go home. She couldn't see her daughter. She was being treated like a criminal, when all she'd done was react to her husband's betrayal. Geneva picked her up at 9 in the morning, her face tight with worry and anger. She didn't say much during the drive to her house, just reached over and squeezed Nia's hand occasionally. When they pulled into the driveway, Geneva finally spoke. She said Nia could stay as long as she needed, that they'd figure this out together, that everything was going to be okay. but her voice shook when she said it, betraying the fear that everything was not going to be okay at all. Nia moved into her childhood bedroom, which Geneva had kept mostly unchanged over the years. The walls still had the same pale yellow paint, the same curtains Nia had picked out when she was 16, the same bookshelf filled with books from high school and college. Sleeping in that room made her feel like she'd traveled backward in time, erasing the last 12 years of her life. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. 2 days ago she'd had a home, a husband, a daughter. Now she had nothing except an elderly mother who was trying not to look as scared as Nia felt. She needed a lawyer. Geneva made calls to people she knew, asking for recommendations, trying to find someone who could help. Most family law attorneys wanted retainers of $10,000 or more, amounts Nia couldn't possibly afford. She had no income, no savings of her own, because everything had been in joint accounts that Sam now controlled. She'd given up her nursing career, and while she technically had a license, she'd need to find a job and wait for paychecks to start coming in. She was financially helpless, exactly the position Sam and Leslie had planned for. After 2 days of calling different law offices and being quoted prices she couldn't pay, Geneva found Julian Ortega. He was a solo practitioner working out of a small office above a dry cleaner, handling divorce and custody cases for people who couldn't afford the big firms. His retainer was $5,000, which was still more money than Nia had, but Geneva said she'd cover it. She withdrew money from her retirement savings, money she'd been setting aside for years, and handed Nia a check. Nia cried when she took it, feeling like a failure, like a burden, like a woman who'd made nothing but wrong choices. Julian Ortega was 42 years old with tired eyes and a cluttered desk covered in case files. He listened to Nia's story, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression growing more concerned as she talked. When she got to the part about the photo, she pulled out her broken phone. The screen was shattered, but it still turned on, and she was able to navigate to her messages. She showed him the photo of Sam with Leslie, showed him the message that said, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Julian studied it carefully, took pictures of it with his own phone, asked if she could forward him the original message. Nia tried. She logged into her account on Julian's computer and opened her messages, but the conversation with Sam from that day was gone, completely deleted, like it never existed. She clicked through every folder, checked the archive, even looked in spam. Nothing. Julian asked if Sam had access to her accounts. Nia said they shared phone plans and accounts for convenience, that she'd never thought to change her passwords or lock him out. Julian's face told her that was a mistake. He said Sam probably had remote access to her phone, could delete messages and control what she saw. Nia felt sick. The one piece of evidence that could prove Sam sent the photo was gone. Julian said they could still use the broken phone as evidence, show that the photo existed even if the message thread was deleted. But he looked worried. He said custody cases were hard to win when one parent had significantly more resources than the other, especially when there was a police report and a restraining order involved. He said they needed to focus on proving that Nia's reaction was justified, that any reasonable person would have responded emotionally to discovering infidelity. He said they'd argue temporary distress, not mental instability. Nia nodded, but she barely heard him. She was thinking about Esther, wondering if her daughter knew what happened, wondering if Sam was telling her lies about why Mommy wasn't home. While Nia was scrambling to find affordable legal help, Sam was meeting with Caldwell and Reeves LLP in their downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows and leather furniture that probably cost more than Nia's car. Victoria Caldwell herself took the case, a woman in her early 50s with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and a reputation for destroying opposing parties in family court. She'd built her career on high-conflict custody battles, representing wealthy clients who wanted to win at any cost. Her fee was $950 per hour, and Sam didn't even blink at the number. Victoria listened to Sam's version of events with the practiced expression of someone who'd heard every story imaginable. Sam told her about Nia's increasingly unstable behavior, about the violent outburst, about his fears for Esther's safety. He showed her edited clips from the hidden cameras, carefully selected moments that showed Nia at her worst, throwing the phone, grabbing his shirt, screaming. Victoria watched the footage and nodded approvingly. She said they had a strong case for emergency custody, that judges took violence in the home seriously, especially when children were present. Within 48 hours of Nia's arrest, Sam's legal team had filed a mountain of paperwork: emergency protective order to extend the temporary restraining order, petition for full legal and physical custody of Esther based on immediate danger, motion for Nia to undergo psychiatric evaluation before being allowed supervised visitation, request for no contact order that would prevent Nia from going near Esther's school, their home, or any place Sam deemed necessary for their safety. The documents painted Nia as violent, unstable, dangerous to herself and others. They described a woman spiraling out of control, a mother unfit to care for a child. Nia received the paperwork by courier while trying to eat toast she couldn't taste. She read through page after page of lies and half-truths, legal language that twisted reality into something unrecognizable. Sam's lawyers described the incident as an unprovoked violent attack. They claimed Nia had a history of emotional instability that Sam had been concerned about for months. They said Esther had expressed fear of her mother. Every sentence felt like a knife, every paragraph another piece of her life being torn away. Julian filed a response, but it felt weak compared to the assault of paperwork from Sam's team. He argued that Nia's reaction was a one-time occurrence, prompted by discovering infidelity, that she had no history of violence, that she'd been a devoted mother for 12 years. He requested shared custody, supervised visitation, anything that would allow Nia to maintain contact with her daughter. But he was one man working alone against a firm with unlimited resources and decades of experience in winning these battles. The divorce proceedings began 2 weeks after Nia's arrest. She met Julian at the courthouse early in the morning, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her coffee. Geneva came with her for moral support, sitting in the gallery behind the defense table, her face set in determined lines. Sam arrived with Victoria Caldwell and 2 associates, all of them dressed in expensive clothes that screamed power and success. Sam wouldn't look at Nia, keeping his eyes forward or on his lawyers, acting like she was a stranger instead of the woman he'd been married to for 12 years. During a recess, Nia saw Sam standing alone in the hallway and made a decision that Julian would later say was a mistake. She approached him, her voice quiet and desperate. She said they could work this out, that she forgave him for the affair, that they could go to counseling and fix their marriage. She said Esther needed both her parents, that tearing their family apart wasn't the answer. She was begging, really, offering to forgive the unforgivable, if it meant keeping her daughter. Sam looked at her like she was pathetic. His voice was cold when he finally spoke, nothing like the man who used to tell her he loved her before bed each night. He said she needed help, serious help, that he was protecting their daughter from a mother who couldn't control herself. He said the best thing Nia could do was accept the custody arrangement and get the treatment she clearly needed. Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway with tears streaming down her face. Julian found her there a few minutes later. He didn't say, "I told you so," but his expression said it for him. He guided her back into the courtroom, sat her down, told her to stop trying to fix things with Sam, because Sam didn't want things fixed. Nia realized in that moment what Julian had probably understood from the beginning. This was never about reconciliation. Sam didn't want his marriage back. He wanted her gone. The custody hearing took place 3 weeks after the initial filing, in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old wood. Judge Harold Brenneman presided, a 61-year-old man with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept on a chain around his neck. He had a reputation for being conservative in custody decisions, favoring traditional family structures and stability over more progressive arrangements. He was also the father of 3 daughters, which Sam's lawyers probably knew and factored into their strategy. Victoria Caldwell opened with a presentation that felt more like a prosecution than a custody argument. She set up a laptop and projector, dimming the lights so everyone could see the screen clearly. Then she played the videos. Carefully edited clips from Sam's hidden cameras showing Nia at her absolute worst. Nia throwing the phone so hard it shattered against the wall. Nia grabbing Sam's shirt with both hands, shaking him, her face contorted with rage. Nia screaming words that were clearly audible, calling him a liar, demanding he tell the truth, her voice getting higher and more hysterical with each accusation. What the videos didn't show was context. They didn't show Sam's month of deliberate cruelty leading up to that moment. They didn't show him sending the photo that broke her heart. They didn't show his calm demeanor while she fell apart, the way he'd stood there like he was watching a stranger instead of his wife. Victoria's editing made it look like Nia had simply exploded without reason, a ticking bomb that finally detonated. The judge watched the videos with a frown, occasionally glancing at Nia like he was trying to reconcile the crying woman at the defense table with the screaming woman on screen. Victoria called witnesses next. 3 of Sam's colleagues from the insurance company testified that he was a devoted father who often left work early to attend Esther's soccer games. They described him as responsible, stable, someone who took his parental duties seriously. One of them mentioned seeing Sam stressed in recent months, worried about his home life, concerned about his wife's emotional state. None of them mentioned his affair because Victoria didn't bring it up. She was constructing a narrative where Sam was the victim and Nia was the problem, and every witness played their part perfectly. Then Leslie took the stand. She introduced herself as Sam's girlfriend, explaining that they'd met at a business conference and developed a connection. She was dressed conservatively for the hearing, wearing a navy dress that covered her arms and fell below her knees, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman from the AI photo, transforming herself into someone respectable and concerned. She testified that Sam had told her about problems in his marriage, about a wife who was increasingly isolated and dependent, about concerns for his daughter's well-being. Leslie claimed that Nia had been stalking her. She said she'd received threatening text messages from an unknown number, messages that told her to stay away from Sam or there would be consequences. She presented screenshots on her phone, conversations that supposedly came from Nia threatening violence if Leslie didn't end the relationship. Julian objected, arguing that there was no proof the messages came from Nia. Victoria countered that the messages started appearing around the same time Nia would have discovered the affair, that the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. The screenshots were fabricated. Leslie had created them herself using apps designed to make fake text conversations look real. But Nia had no way to prove that. She'd never sent threatening messages to anyone, had never even known Leslie existed until the night everything fell apart. She tried to tell Julian this, but he was already drowning in objections that Judge Brenneman kept overruling. The evidence piled up, piece after piece, all of it pointing to Nia being obsessed, unstable, dangerous. When it was the defense's turn, Julian did his best with limited resources. He called Geneva to the stand, and she testified that Nia had been a loving mother for 12 years, that she'd never witnessed any violence or instability, that her daughter was devoted to Esther. But Victoria tore into Geneva on cross-examination, suggesting that of course a mother would defend her daughter. That family testimony was inherently biased. She asked Geneva if she'd been present in Nia's home every day, if she could really testify to what happened behind closed doors. Geneva admitted she couldn't, and Victoria smiled like she'd won a point. Julian tried to introduce the photo, the AI-generated image that had started everything. He argued that Nia's reaction was justified because anyone would be devastated by discovering their spouse's infidelity. He showed the broken phone with the photo still visible on the cracked screen, said this was evidence that Sam had deliberately provoked his wife into an emotional response. It should have been a strong argument, proof that Nia had been manipulated and set up. But Victoria was ready. She requested that the court order a forensic analysis of the image, suggesting that its authenticity needed to be verified before it could be considered evidence. Judge Brenneman agreed, ordering a third-party expert to examine the photo and report back. The hearing was recessed for 2 days while the analysis was completed. Nia went back to Geneva's house feeling like maybe, finally, something would go her way. The expert would confirm the photo was real, would confirm it came from Sam's number, would confirm that she'd been telling the truth all along. 2 days later, they reconvened. The expert took the stand, a man in his 30s who worked for a digital forensics company. He explained that he'd examined the photo using multiple analysis tools, looking for signs of manipulation or artificial generation. He testified that the image showed clear markers of AI creation. Irregular pixel patterns around the edges, lighting inconsistencies, subtle distortions in facial features that only became apparent under close examination. He said with reasonable certainty that the photo was artificially generated, not a real photograph. Julian saw where this was going and tried to salvage it. He argued that the AI generation proved Sam's guilt, that Sam had created a fake photo to hurt Nia, but Victoria had a different interpretation ready. She stood up and delivered it calmly, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. She said the forensic evidence actually supported Sam's version of events. She said Nia had created the fake photo herself, sent it to her own phone from Sam's number using spyware or by accessing his accounts, then destroyed the evidence by smashing the phone. She said this proved premeditation, that Nia had manufactured a justification for her violent behavior. Nia stood up without thinking, her voice breaking as she screamed that it was a lie. She said Sam sent her that photo, that she would never create something so cruel, that Victoria was twisting everything. Judge Brenneman banged his gavel and told her to sit down and control herself. Julian pulled her back into her chair, whispering urgently that she needed to stay calm, that outbursts were making things worse. But Nia couldn't stay calm. Her entire defense was being dismantled in front of her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The judge asked if Nia had proof that Sam sent the message, phone records showing the transmission from his number, text logs from the carrier, anything that would verify her version of events. Julian said they'd attempted to retrieve those records, but the message thread had been deleted from both phones, and the carrier only kept texts for a limited time. He said Sam likely deleted the evidence remotely, but he couldn't prove that either. Judge Brenneman took a recess to review all the evidence and make his decision. The ruling came down like a hammer. Full legal and physical custody awarded to Sam Fletcher. Nia was granted supervised visitation only, contingent on completing several requirements. She had to attend anger management classes twice a week for a minimum of 6 months. She had to undergo psychiatric evaluation and follow any treatment recommendations. She had to complete a parenting class approved by the court. She had to submit to random drug testing to ensure she wasn't using substances to cope with stress. Only after completing all these requirements and receiving clearance from a court-appointed psychologist would she be considered for unsupervised visitation. The restraining order would remain in effect. Nia could not approach Esther's school, could not go near their home, could not attend any of Esther's extracurricular activities. Supervised visits would take place at a neutral location with a court-approved supervisor present, and only if Sam agreed to schedule them. He was under no obligation to make Esther available for visits if he believed it would be detrimental to her emotional well-being. Nia heard the words, but they didn't feel real. She looked at the judge, then at Sam, then at Julian, waiting for someone to say this was a mistake. But no one did. The courtroom stayed silent except for the sound of Victoria Caldwell gathering her papers with barely concealed satisfaction. Geneva was crying quietly in the gallery. Julian had his head in his hands, and Sam still wouldn't look at Nia, keeping his eyes anywhere else, like she'd already stopped existing to him. The next day, social services brought Esther to a supervised goodbye visit at a neutral office with gray walls and uncomfortable chairs. A social worker sat in the corner taking notes while Nia and Esther sat across from each other at a small table. Esther had been crying, her eyes red and swollen, her face showing confusion that broke Nia's heart. She asked why Mommy couldn't come home, why she had to live with Grandma Geneva instead, why everything was different now. Nia wanted to tell her daughter the truth, that Daddy had lied, that he'd set Mommy up, that none of this was fair or right. But she couldn't say those things with the social worker listening, couldn't poison Esther against her father even though he'd already poisoned Esther against her. So she lied. She said Mommy and Daddy were having some grown-up problems that needed to be fixed, that sometimes adults needed space to work things out, that it had nothing to do with how much she loved Esther. Esther asked when she'd see Mommy again. Nia said soon, even though she had no idea if that was true. Esther asked if she did something wrong, if Mommy was mad at her. Nia's voice broke when she promised that nothing was Esther's fault, that she was the best daughter anyone could ask for, that mommy loved her more than anything in the world. The social worker announced they had 5 minutes left. Nia spent those 5 minutes holding her daughter, memorizing the feel of her, trying not to cry because she didn't want Esther's last memory of this visit to be mommy falling apart. When the time was up, Esther was escorted out by the social worker. She looked back 3 times before the door closed, each glance like a knife in Nia's chest. Geneva had been waiting in the lobby and came in to find Nia sitting alone at the table, staring at nothing. She didn't speak on the drive home. She didn't eat the dinner Geneva made. She went to her room and lay down and didn't move for 16 hours. Geneva tried everything to pull her daughter out of the darkness. She brought food that Nia didn't eat. She sat on the edge of the bed and talked about how they'd get through this together. She made plans for how Nia could complete the court requirements and get visitation rights back. But Nia barely responded, lost in a grief so deep it felt like drowning. She'd lost her home, her marriage, her daughter, her entire identity as a wife and mother. She didn't know who she was anymore, without those things. 6 weeks passed in a blur. Geneva forced Nia to enroll in the anger management classes the court required, driving her there twice a week and waiting in the parking lot to take her home. The classes were held in a church basement with 9 other people who'd been court-ordered to attend. They sat in a circle and talked about managing emotions, about recognizing triggers, about healthy coping mechanisms. The instructor was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who meant well, but clearly thought everyone in the room had done something wrong. Nia sat there week after week, completing worksheets about identifying anger, knowing she was only angry because she'd been set up by the man she'd trusted most. The psychiatric evaluation was worse. The court-appointed psychologist was a man in his 60s who asked invasive questions about her childhood, her marriage, her emotional state. He wanted to know if she'd ever had suicidal thoughts, if she heard voices, if she had periods of uncontrollable rage. Nia answered honestly, said she'd never had mental health issues before all this happened, that her reaction was situational and not indicative of deeper problems. But she could tell he didn't believe her. He'd read the police report and watched the videos and already formed his opinion before she walked into his office. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Geneva woke Nia up earlier than usual. She said there was something Nia needed to know, that she'd found out from a neighbor who'd called to check on them. Nia sat up in bed, confused and still half asleep. Geneva's voice was gentle but firm when she delivered the news. Sam had remarried. Just 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, he'd married Leslie in a small ceremony at the courthouse. They were already living together in the house that used to be Nia's home. Nia made it to the bathroom before she started vomiting. She knelt on the cold tile and threw up until there was nothing left, her body rejecting reality the only way it knew how. Geneva held her hair back and rubbed her shoulder, murmuring things that were supposed to be comforting but couldn't possibly help. When the vomiting stopped, the panic attacks started. Nia couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process that Sam had moved on so quickly while she was still drowning in the wreckage he'd created. For 3 days, Nia couldn't leave her room. She had panic attacks that came without warning, her heart racing and her vision going dark at the edges. She couldn't eat because everything made her nauseous. She couldn't sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sam and Leslie in her house, in her bed, living the life that used to be hers. Geneva called the psychologist in a panic, saying her daughter was having a crisis. He prescribed medication for anxiety and depression, told Geneva to watch Nia carefully for signs of self-harm. Geneva sat Nia down on the 4th day and told her in no uncertain terms that she had to fight. She said Esther needed her mother, that giving up wasn't an option, that Sam and Leslie would not win. She said Nia had to complete the court requirements, had to get back on her feet, had to prove she was stable enough to be in her daughter's life. She said it wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, but it was reality, and the only way forward was through. Something in Geneva's words got through. Nia started taking the medication, started forcing herself to eat, started showing up to her appointments even when every cell in her body wanted to stay in bed. She enrolled in parenting classes even though she'd been a good mother for 12 years and didn't need a stranger telling her how to raise her child. She showed up for drug tests every time the court called, peeing in a cup while a monitor watched to make sure she wasn't cheating. She did everything they asked because it was the only path back to Esther. She also went back to work. Her nursing license was still active, but she'd been out of the field for 3 years, so hospitals were hesitant to hire her. She finally got a position at Mercy General on the night shift, the least desirable hours that no one else wanted. The pay was decent, and the work kept her mind occupied, which was all she really needed. She'd work 11-hour shifts from 7 at night until 6 in the morning, come home and sleep for a few hours, wake up and go to her required classes, then do it all over again. The exhaustion was brutal, but it was better than having time to think. The court had approved supervised phone calls between Nia and Esther twice a week through a monitored app that recorded every conversation. The first call happened 3 weeks after the custody ruling. Nia sat at Geneva's Kit Lindsay table with her phone in shaking hands, waiting for the call to connect. When Esther's face appeared on the screen, Nia almost dropped the phone. Her daughter looked thinner, sadder, older somehow. She said hi in a small voice, not the bright, enthusiastic greeting Nia was used to. They talked for 15 minutes about nothing important. School was fine. Soccer was fine. Everything was fine. Esther's answers were short and careful, like she was worried about saying the wrong thing. She asked when Mommy could come home, and Nia gave the same answer as before. Soon, baby, soon. She asked if Mommy was mad at Daddy, and Nia lied again, said no, that sometimes grown-ups just need to live separately. She asked if Leslie was going to be her new mommy, and Nia's heart stopped. She said no, that no one could ever replace Mommy, that she would always be Esther's mother no matter what. Esther nodded but didn't look convinced. After 2 months, Sam started canceling calls. He'd send messages through the court app saying Esther was too upset after talking to Nia, that the calls were emotionally harmful, that she needed space to adjust to her new family situation. The court supervisor reviewed the call recordings and found nothing problematic, but Sam kept canceling anyway. Twice a week became once a week. Once a week became every other week. And there was nothing Nia could do except file motions that Julian said probably wouldn't go anywhere. Then the calls stopped completely. Sam sent a final message saying he was exercising his right as custodial parent to limit contact that he deemed detrimental to Esther's well-being. He said Esther needed structure and discipline, not emotional conversations that left her confused and upset. He said he was teaching her to be strong, to handle difficult situations, to not rely on coddling and false comfort. The message was clearly written by his lawyers, but the sentiment was all Sam. Cold, controlling, justified by twisted logic. Nia called Julian immediately. He said they could file an emergency motion to reinstate the calls, but that it could take weeks to get a hearing, and there was no guarantee the judge would rule in her favor. Sam had custody. Sam had rights. Sam could make decisions about Esther's well-being, and unless they could prove those decisions were actively harmful, the court wouldn't intervene. Nia screamed into a pillow after that call, screamed until her throat was raw, and Geneva came running to check on her. Geneva had warned her this would happen. On one of the early nights after the custody loss, when Nia was still in shock and couldn't process reality, Geneva had said the hard truth out loud. She said Sam was going to erase Nia from Esther's life completely, that he would use every tool at his disposal to make Nia disappear. She said Nia wasn't fighting just her ex-husband. She was fighting a system that had already decided she was guilty, a system that gave Sam all the power and Nia none. Nia had argued, had said the courts would see she was complying with every requirement, that they'd eventually give her visitation. Geneva had looked at her daughter with profound sadness and said she hoped that was true, but that hoping didn't make things happen. Now, 4 months after losing custody, Nia saw that Geneva had been right. She was doing everything the court asked, and it made no difference. She'd completed 8 weeks of anger management and was halfway through the required 6 months. She was taking medication prescribed by the court psychologist, and attending weekly therapy sessions. She'd passed every drug test. She'd finished the parenting class and received a certificate of completion. She was working full-time as a nurse, proving she could support herself financially. And none of it mattered because Sam controlled access to Esther, and Sam had decided Nia didn't deserve that access. While Nia was fighting to prove she deserved to be a mother, Esther was learning what it meant to live with Leslie. The first week after the wedding, Leslie played the role of fun stepmom perfectly. She took Esther shopping for new clothes, let her pick out decorations for her room, made her favorite foods for dinner. She asked questions about school and friends and soccer, acting interested and supportive. She told Esther to think of her as a big sister more than a stepmom, that they were going to have so much fun together. Esther wanted to believe her, because believing meant maybe this new family arrangement wouldn't be terrible. But Sam traveled for work the way he always had, sometimes gone for days at a time, sometimes for entire weeks. The first time he left for a business trip after the wedding, Leslie's mask started to slip. The morning after Sam's flight, Leslie made breakfast and sat across from Esther at the Kit Lindsay table. She watched the girl eat pancakes with an expression that made Esther uncomfortable. When Esther was done, Leslie said they needed to talk about some new rules now that it was just the two of them. The rules came fast and firm. Esther would clean her own room and do her own laundry from now on because Leslie wasn't a maid. She would come straight home after school, with no stops at friends' houses, unless Leslie specifically approved it. She would spend less time on her phone and more time being productive, so the phone would stay in the Kit Lindsay overnight. She would eat what was served without complaining and clean her plate completely. Esther nodded, confused but wanting to avoid conflict. These rules didn't seem that unreasonable on the surface. But the rules kept coming. Esther wasn't allowed in certain rooms of the house when Leslie was using them. She had to ask permission before getting food from the Kit Lindsay outside of designated meal times. She couldn't make noise before 9 in the morning or after 8 at night because Leslie needed peace and quiet. She had to knock before entering any room, even common areas, in case Leslie was busy. Esther started feeling like a guest in her own home, walking on eggshells, afraid of breaking rules she didn't fully understand. The food restrictions started subtle. Leslie began serving smaller portions at dinner, saying Esther needed to watch her weight before soccer season started. Esther wasn't overweight. She was a healthy 12-year-old who played sports and had normal energy levels. But Leslie made comments about how athletes needed to be lean, how excess fat would slow her down on the field, how discipline started with diet. Esther ate the smaller portions and tried not to think about how hungry she felt afterward. Then breakfast disappeared. Leslie said teenagers slept too late and missed the proper breakfast window, that eating right after waking was bad for digestion anyway. She said a piece of fruit before school was sufficient, that Esther could eat a real lunch later. Esther packed the fruit in her backpack and ate it on the bus, her stomach already growling before first period. She bought lunch at school with money from her allowance, grateful for the cafeteria food she'd previously complained about. But Leslie noticed the lunch money disappearing. She confronted Esther about spending money without permission, said if she was going to eat at school then she didn't need dinner at home. Esther tried to explain she was hungry, that one piece of fruit wasn't enough food. Leslie's expression went cold. She said Esther's mother had spoiled her, had taught her to be entitled and demanding, that it was time to learn gratitude and discipline. She said millions of children around the world didn't have food at all, that Esther should be thankful for what she was given instead of complaining. The portions at dinner got even smaller. Half a chicken breast and some vegetables. A cup of pasta with no sauce. A bowl of soup that was mostly broth. Esther ate everything on her plate because she was starving, but the food was never enough. She started feeling dizzy during soccer practice, too weak to run as fast as she used to. Her coach noticed and asked if she was feeling okay. Esther said she was fine, afraid that admitting problems at home would make things worse. When Sam called from his business trips, Leslie was always prepared. She'd tell Esther exactly what to say before putting her on the phone. Everything was great. School was good. Soccer was fun. She loved having Leslie around. If Esther deviated from the script, If she hinted that things weren't actually fine, Leslie would take the phone back and make excuses. Esther was tired. Esther was moody. Preteen hormones. Sam accepted these explanations because he wanted to believe his new wife was taking good care of his daughter. The first time Esther cried from hunger, Leslie slapped her. Not hard enough to leave a lasting mark, but hard enough to shock. Leslie said crying was manipulation, that Esther was trying to make her feel guilty for enforcing discipline. She said if Esther cried again, there would be consequences. Esther learned to cry silently in her room, with her face buried in a pillow so Leslie wouldn't hear. 3 weeks into Sam's longest business trip, 2 weeks in the Atlanta office helping train new employees, Leslie implemented the fast. She told Esther that spiritual discipline required sacrifice, that going without food taught self-control and mental strength. She said they'd do a 3-day fast together, drinking only water, cleansing their bodies and minds. Esther said she didn't want to fast, that she was already hungry all the time. Leslie said she wasn't asking, she was telling, and that Esther would learn to respect authority in this house. For 3 days, Esther got nothing but water. She felt weak and dizzy, couldn't concentrate at school, nearly fainted during gym class. On the 3rd night, she was so hungry she snuck downstairs after Leslie went to bed, thinking she could grab something small without being caught. But Leslie had anticipated this. She was waiting in the dark Kit Lindsay, sitting at the table with the lights off. When Esther opened the refrigerator and the light spilled out, Leslie's voice cut through the darkness. She said Esther had failed the test, had proven she had no self-control, that the punishment would be severe. The punishment was more isolation. Esther's phone was permanently confiscated, with Leslie saying it was a distraction Esther didn't deserve. She was pulled from after-school activities, including soccer, with Leslie emailing the coach about family obligations that required Esther to come straight home every day. Her friends stopped calling the house phone after Leslie told them repeatedly that Esther was too busy to socialize. Within a month, Esther's entire social life had disappeared. The psychological abuse was worse than the physical hunger. Leslie told Esther daily that her mother hadn't wanted her, that Nia had attacked Sam because she resented being stuck with a child. She said Nia was violent and unstable, that Esther was lucky Sam had rescued her before Nia could hurt her. She said Sam and Leslie were the only people who truly cared about Esther, that she should be grateful instead of ungrateful. Esther tried to defend her mother, but Leslie shut her down, said if she kept talking about Nia, then she'd lose the privilege of speaking at all. After the 3-day fast ended, food became a reward system. If Esther followed all the rules perfectly, she got a full meal. If she broke any rule, even tiny ones like forgetting to knock before entering a room, she got crackers and water. Esther learned to be perfect, to anticipate Leslie's moods, to make herself invisible. But perfection was impossible, and Leslie's standards kept changing, which meant Esther was always falling short. Her weight dropped rapidly. She'd been 102 pounds at the custody hearing. 2 months into living with Leslie, she was 94 pounds. 3 months in, she was 86 pounds. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. Her face looked gaunt. Her hair started thinning from malnutrition. Teachers at school noticed, but when they called home to express concern, Leslie had explanations ready. Esther was a picky eater. She was going through a growth spurt. She'd been sick recently. All normal things that didn't warrant alarm. When Sam came home from his trips, Esther looked different, but not dramatically so because the changes happened gradually. He noticed she seemed quieter, more withdrawn, but Leslie said that was normal for preteens adjusting to divorce and new family structures. He noticed her clothes seemed bigger, but Leslie said she'd bought sizes up so Esther could grow into them. He wanted to believe everything was fine, because believing otherwise meant admitting he'd made a terrible mistake. The neighbors-on started noticing, though. Mrs. Lindsay saw Esther getting on the bus one morning and was shocked by how thin she looked. Mr. Patterson next door heard Leslie yelling at Esther through an open window, the words harsh and cruel. Mrs. Grant, the elderly widow 4 houses down who'd known Nia for years, saw Esther in the yard one afternoon and barely recognized her. But no one called CPS because people don't like to interfere in other families' business, don't like to assume the worst, don't want to cause problems if they're wrong. Until one night in early November, when Esther's hunger became unbearable. She'd had nothing but 4 crackers all day, and her stomach hurt so badly she couldn't sleep. She waited until she heard Leslie's bedroom door close, then snuck out of her own room. She went to the back door as quietly as possible, unlocked it, and slipped outside. She walked 4 houses down in her pajamas and bare feet, shivering in the cold night air, and knocked on Mrs. Grant's door. Phyllis Grant answered in her bathrobe, surprised to see a child on her doorstep at 10 at night. She recognized Esther immediately and was horrified by what she saw. This girl was skeletal, her collarbones protruding sharply, her eyes sunken and dull. Phyllis pulled her inside without asking questions, wrapped her in a blanket, and went straight to the Kit Lindsay. She made 2 sandwiches, poured a glass of milk, put everything on a plate, and set it in front of Esther. The girl ate so fast Phyllis worried she might choke, stuffing food in her mouth like someone who hadn't seen a real meal in weeks. While Esther ate, Phyllis asked careful questions. Was everything okay at home? Was she eating enough? Did her father know she was this thin? Esther's answers were vague and scared. She said Leslie was teaching her discipline. She said she wasn't supposed to complain. She begged Phyllis not to tell her stepmom she'd been there because there would be consequences. The fear in her voice was real and profound. Phyllis gave Esther 2 more sandwiches to take with her and watched the girl hide them in her pajama shirt. Before Esther left, Phyllis made a decision. She pulled out her phone and took a photo, quickly and without explanation. Esther was too focused on getting back home before Leslie noticed she was gone to question it. She slipped back through the darkness to her house, unlocked the back door as quietly as possible, and made it to her room without being caught. On a Tuesday evening in late February, Nia was folding laundry in the living room while Geneva watched the news. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was spam or a wrong number. But something made her open it anyway. The message was brief and alarming. Nia, this is Phyllis from Oakwood Drive. I need you to see something. Please call me immediately. Nia stared at the name, trying to place it. Phyllis Grant, the elderly widow who lived 4 houses down from what used to be Nia's home. They'd been friendly neighbors, chatting occasionally at the mailbox, waving when they passed each other on the street. Phyllis had sent a card after the custody hearing, expressing sympathy and confusion about the court's decision. But they hadn't spoken since. Why would Phyllis be contacting her now, 5 months later, with such urgency? Before Nia could call, another message came through. This one was just an image file, no explanation. Nia tapped it and waited for it to load, her heart already starting to race with an anxiety she couldn't name. The image appeared on her screen slowly, top to bottom, the way photos sometimes load on weak connections. At first, Nia couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. A thin figure slumped against a door, wearing oversized clothes that hung off a skeletal frame. The person's face was turned slightly away from the camera, but visible enough to see hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. Nia's brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. She stared at the photo, her hands beginning to shake. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be what she thought it was. The figure was too thin, too frail, too broken to be a healthy 12-year-old girl. But the hair was the same, the nose was the same, the curve of the jaw was the same. Nia's phone slipped from her hands and hit the floor. She picked it up with trembling fingers and looked again, praying she was wrong, praying she was seeing things. Another text from Phyllis came through. 3 words that made Nia's world stop. "It's Esther. Last night," Nia screamed. The sound tore from her throat without permission, raw and primal, and full of every emotion she'd been holding back for 5 months. Geneva dropped her coffee mug and rushed over, asking what was wrong, trying to take the phone to see what had caused such a reaction. Nia couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stare at the photo of her daughter, her baby, her Esther. Looking like a concentration camp victim, looking like she was dying, looking like no child should ever look. Geneva finally wrestled the phone away and looked at the screen. Her face went white. She sat down heavily on the couch, one hand over her mouth, the other still holding the phone. She looked at the image for a long time, then read the text messages, then looked at Nia, who was now on the floor crying so hard no sound was coming out. Geneva said something, but Nia couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. She felt like she was drowning, like someone had pushed her underwater and she couldn't find the surface. Geneva made the next moves because Nia was incapable of functioning. She called the number Phyllis had texted from, putting it on speaker so they could both hear. Phyllis answered immediately, her elderly voice shaking with distress. She explained that Esther had come to her house last night around 10, barefoot and starving, begging for food. She said she'd given the girl sandwiches and been horrified by how thin she was, how scared she seemed. She said Esther had made her promise not to tell Leslie, had begged her not to say anything because there would be consequences. Phyllis said she'd taken the photo without explaining why, just knowing that someone needed to see what was happening to that child. Nia finally found her voice, though it came out broken and desperate. She asked Phyllis how bad it was in person, if the photo was accurate, or if maybe the lighting made it look worse than reality. Phyllis was quiet for a moment, then said no, the photo didn't do it justice. She said Esther looked like she weighed maybe 70 pounds, that her collarbones were sticking out so far they looked painful, that her arms were just bone with skin stretched over them. She said the girl had eaten 4 sandwiches in 10 minutes, like someone who hadn't seen food in days. She said whatever was happening in that house was criminal, and someone needed to stop it immediately. Geneva took over the conversation, asking Phyllis specific questions about timing and what Esther had said. Phyllis provided every detail she could remember, including Esther's fear of her stepmother and her insistence that she wasn't supposed to complain. Geneva thanked her profusely, told her she might have just saved a child's life, promised they would take action immediately. When she hung up, she turned to Nia and said they needed to move fast, that they had evidence now, that this was the break they'd been waiting for, even though it came at a horrific cost. Nia couldn't think straight. She kept looking at the photo, zooming in on Esther's face, trying to reconcile this skeletal child with the healthy daughter she'd last seen 5 months ago. 68 pounds. That's what Phyllis estimated. Esther had been 102 pounds at the custody hearing. She'd lost 34 pounds in 5 months. That was more than a quarter of her body weight. That was starvation. That was abuse. That was everything Nia had feared and worse. Geneva dialed Julian Ortega's number and got his voicemail because it was after business hours. She left an urgent message explaining they had photographic evidence of child abuse, that Esther was in immediate danger, that they needed an emergency motion filed immediately. She sent him the photo while she was still leaving the message, knowing he'd check his email even if he didn't listen to voicemail right away. Then she called the CPS hotline and reported suspected child abuse, providing the address, describing the photo, explaining the custody situation. The CPS operator took the report seriously. She asked multiple questions about the child's condition, about when the photo was taken, about whether there was immediate danger. Geneva explained that Esther was living with her father and stepmother, that the stepmother had a history the operator should look into, that this was an emergency situation requiring immediate intervention. The operator said she was flagging the report as high priority, and that a caseworker would be assigned first thing in the morning. She said if they believed the child was in imminent danger, they should call 911, but Geneva said the child was currently in the home and calling police might escalate the situation before CPS could intervene properly. After hanging up with CPS, Geneva tried Julian again. This time he answered, sounding confused about why his client's mother was calling so late. Geneva didn't waste time with pleasantries. She told him to check his email immediately, that they had evidence of severe child abuse, that he needed to file an emergency motion tonight to suspend Sam's custody. Julian put her on hold, presumably to check his email. When he came back, his voice was different, shocked and angry and already shifting into lawyer mode. He said he'd file the emergency motion within the hour, that he'd request an immediate hearing, that this changed everything. Nia sat on the floor holding her phone, unable to look away from the photo. Every time she blinked, she saw it again, burned into her retinas like a brand. Her daughter was being starved. Her daughter was being tortured. Her daughter was dying in that house while Nia completed anger management classes and parenting courses that she didn't need. The court had said it was protecting Esther by keeping her away from Nia. The court had been wrong, catastrophically, criminally wrong, and Esther had paid the price for that mistake with months of suffering. Geneva tried to get Nia to eat something, to drink water, to take one of her anxiety pills. Nia refused all of it. She said she didn't deserve comfort while her daughter was in that house, starving and scared and probably wondering why mommy had abandoned her. Geneva said that thinking like that wouldn't help anyone, that Nia needed to stay functional because tomorrow was going to be intense. She said CPS would investigate, Julian would fight for emergency custody, and Nia needed to be ready to take Esther home the moment the court allowed it. But Nia's mind was stuck on one thought. She wanted to go to that house right now. She wanted to break down the door, grab her daughter, and run. She wanted to put Esther in the car and drive until they were somewhere Sam and Leslie could never find them. She said this out loud, her voice desperate and furious. Geneva grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eyes. She said if Nia violated the restraining order, if she went near that house or approached Esther without court permission, she would be arrested. She said they would use that arrest to prove Nia was unstable, to argue she should never get custody back. She said the only way to save Esther was to do this legally, no matter how much it hurt to wait. Nia knew Geneva was right, but every cell in her body was screaming to act. She was Esther's mother. Her child was in danger. Every instinct demanded she go protect her baby immediately. But the system that had failed to protect Esther would punish Nia for trying to do what the system should have done months ago. She would have to wait until morning, until CPS showed up, until strangers decided whether her daughter's suffering was severe enough to warrant intervention. She would have to trust the same system that had believed Sam over her, that had called her violent and unstable, that had handed her daughter to a trafficker. The night lasted forever. Nia didn't sleep at all, couldn't even lie down. She sat on the couch with her phone in her hands, staring at the photo of Esther, memorizing every detail of her daughter's suffering. She counted the visible ribs in the photo. She studied the way Esther's clothes hung off her frame like they were 3 sizes too big. She looked at her daughter's face and saw exhaustion and fear and resignation that no 12-year-old should ever feel. She made promises to that photo, whispered apologies for not protecting her, for trusting the court, for failing in the most fundamental way a mother could fail. Geneva dozed fitfully in the recliner, waking up every hour to check on Nia. Around 3 in the morning, in the bureau, she made coffee because neither of them would be sleeping anyway. They sat in the Kit Lindsay as the hours crawled by, waiting for the sun to come up, waiting for CPS to move, waiting for the nightmare to finally end. Geneva kept saying everything would be okay now, that they had proof, that justice would finally happen, but Nia couldn't believe that. The system had failed Esther once already. What was to stop it from failing her again? At 6 in the morning, Julian called. He'd filed the emergency motion and gotten a judge to agree to an expedited hearing, but it wouldn't happen until after CPS completed their investigation. He said the court wanted to see what CPS found before making any custody changes. Nia asked what would happen to Esther in the meantime, where she would go if CPS removed her from the home. Julian said she'd likely go to temporary foster care or a group home until the custody hearing. Nia said no, absolutely not. Her daughter was not going to strangers after what she'd been through. Julian said he'd argue for emergency placement with Nia, but that it would depend on what CPS found and whether they believed Esther was safe with her mother. The waiting was torture. Geneva made breakfast that Nia couldn't eat. The clock moved so slowly it felt broken. Nia paced the house, checking her phone every 30 seconds even though no one had called. She showered and dressed in clean clothes because Geneva insisted, going through the motions like a robot. By 8 in the morning she was ready to climb out of her skin, the anxiety making her hands shake and her heart race. CPS was supposed to do a welfare check first thing. Why hadn't anyone called yet? What was taking so long? What if Leslie had already hurt Esther worse? What if they were too late? At 8:47, Julian called. CPS was at the house. They'd brought police with them to ensure compliance. Leslie had tried to refuse entry, but the officer had threatened to arrest her for obstruction. They were inside now, conducting the welfare check. Julian said he'd call back as soon as he heard anything. Nia wanted to drive to that house, wanted to be there when they found Esther, wanted to see her daughter with her own eyes. But Geneva physically blocked the door and reminded her that showing up would make everything worse. 30 minutes later, Julian called back. His voice was shaking. They'd found Esther in her bedroom, barely conscious, severely dehydrated and malnourished. CPS had called an ambulance immediately. Leslie had been arrested, and Esther was being transported to Mercy General Hospital. The hospital where Nia worked. The hospital where Nia could actually go without violating any court orders because it was a public space, and she had a legitimate reason to be there. Nia and Geneva were in the car before Julian finished talking. Geneva drove because Nia was shaking too hard to be trusted behind the wheel. They made the 15-minute drive in 10 minutes. Geneva, running 2 red lights and not caring. They parked in the emergency lot and ran to the entrance, Nia's badge getting them through security without questions. The ER nurse at the desk recognized Nia and saw the panic on her face. Before Nia could ask, the nurse said they'd just brought in a pediatric patient matching Esther Fletcher's description, that she was in Trauma Bay 3, that the doctor was with her now. Nia ran. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for approval, just ran down the hallway toward Trauma Bay 3. She pushed through the curtain and saw her daughter on a gurney, hooked up to IV lines and monitors, looking even worse in person than she had in the photo. A doctor Nia didn't know was examining Esther, a nurse was adjusting the IV, and both of them turned when Nia burst in. The doctor started to tell her she couldn't be there, but Nia wasn't listening. She pushed past him and dropped to her knees at Esther's bedside. Her daughter's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, her skin pale and stretched too tight over bones that were never meant to be visible. Nia put her hand on Esther's forehead, felt how cold she was, saw how small she'd become. She started crying, the sobs coming out in waves, all the grief and rage and guilt of the past 5 months pouring out in front of strangers who were trying to save her child's life. She whispered apologies, told Esther she was here now, promised no one would hurt her ever again. Esther's eyes opened slightly. She looked at Nia without recognition at first, her gaze unfocused and confused. Then something clicked. Her lips moved and a single word came out, barely audible above the beeping monitors. "Mommy." Nia collapsed forward, her forehead against the gurney rail, her hand still touching Esther's face. Geneva came up behind her, one hand on Nia's shoulder, crying too. The doctor had stopped trying to make them leave, probably realizing that this reunion was more important than protocol. He stepped back and let them have the moment, making notes on his tablet while giving them space. The nurse adjusted Esther's blanket and quietly explained that they were treating severe dehydration and malnutrition, that she'd need to be admitted for at least a few days, that the damage was extensive but potentially reversible with proper care. Nia didn't leave Esther's side, not when they moved her to a regular room, not when the nurses came to check vitals, not when doctors did examinations, not when Geneva tried to convince her to eat something or rest. She pulled a chair up next to the bed and stayed there, holding Esther's hand, watching her daughter sleep, keeping vigil like she should have been allowed to do 5 months ago. This was where she belonged. This was her place. And no court, no judge, no system was ever taking her away from this child again. Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference. And we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now let's continue. While Nia sat with Esther in the hospital, CPS and police were tearing apart the Fletcher residence looking for evidence. Officer Blake Thornton had been the one to accompany CPS caseworker Donna Reyes to the house that morning, expecting maybe a neglect case, maybe a kid who wasn't being fed enough. What they found was so much worse than either of them had prepared for. Donna had been doing this job for 11 years and thought she'd seen everything. She'd removed kids from homes with no heat, no food, parents high on drugs. But Esther's bedroom shocked her into silence. The room was completely bare. No posters on the walls, no decorations, no signs that a child lived there. Just white walls and a single mattress on the floor with a thin blanket. No dresser, no toys, no books. The closet held 3 outfits, all of them too big because Esther had lost so much weight they no longer fit properly. Blake photographed everything, documenting the emptiness, the stark contrast between this room and what a 12-year-old's space should look like. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic deprivation, isolation designed to break someone's spirit. Donna found the notebook under the mattress while looking for any personal items Esther might want at the hospital. It was a small spiral notebook, the kind kids use for school, filled with handwriting that got progressively shakier and smaller as the pages went on. The early entries were dated starting 3 weeks after Sam and Leslie's wedding. Donna started reading and had to stop twice because her hands were shaking too hard to hold the pages. This was a diary of torture, written by a child documenting her own abuse, because she had no other way to process what was happening to her. The entries were detailed and heartbreaking. Day 14. Leslie said I'm getting fat and need to eat less. She gave me cereal but no milk this morning. Day 23. She locked my door last night. I couldn't get out to use the bathroom. I'm scared. Day 37. I only got crackers today. My stomach hurts. I want Mom. Day 47. She said if I cry again, she'll lock me in the basement. I don't cry anymore where she can see. Day 63. I ate 4 crackers today. My head feels fuzzy. My stomach hurts so bad I can't sleep. Day 81. I want my mom. Please God, let me see my mom. I promise I'll be good. Blake called for a forensics team to process the house as a crime scene. While they waited, Donna and Blake searched the rest of the home. The master bedroom looked normal, even luxurious, with expensive furniture and a closet full of designer clothes. Esther's bathroom had a single toothbrush and a bar of soap, nothing else. The Kit Lindsay was fully stocked with food that Esther apparently wasn't allowed to eat. In the pantry, they found a lock on the outside of the door, fresh scratches on the floor suggesting it was used regularly. The refrigerator had a combination lock on it that Blake photographed before forcing open. In the garage, they found plastic storage bins filled with Esther's belongings. Her soccer trophies, her books, her stuffed animals, her clothes that actually fit, photo albums full of pictures with Nia. Everything that made Esther herself had been stripped away and hidden in boxes like it never existed. Donna bagged everything as evidence while Blake kept photographing, both of them working in grim silence. This wasn't a parent making mistakes. This was deliberate, methodical abuse designed to erase a child's identity and break her down completely. Leslie was handcuffed and sitting in the back of Blake's patrol car when the ambulance left with Esther. She'd been screaming since they put the cuffs on, insisting they had no right to be there, that Esther was a liar and manipulator just like her mother. Donna had heard abusers make excuses before, but Leslie's performance was something else entirely. She showed no concern for Esther's condition, no remorse for what she'd done, only rage at being caught. When Donna told her that Esther weighed 68 pounds and was in critical condition, Leslie's response was that the girl was being dramatic and seeking attention. Blake put Leslie in an interview room at the Metropolitan Police Department and left her there for 2 hours before Detectives Austin Booker and Tasha Freeland came in. This was a tactic they used with suspects who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Let them sit in silence. Let them get uncomfortable. Let them start second-guessing themselves. Leslie spent those 2 hours alternating between fury and forced calm, practicing what she'd say, preparing her defense. She had no idea that while she sat there, Blake was running her information through every database available. The red flag came up immediately. Leslie Carmine was flagged in the National Crime Information Center database with an active warrant. Blake pulled the file and felt his stomach drop. Multiple aliases across multiple states. Leslie Morton, Carmine Baptiste, Laura Selleck. Each name connected to a different city, a different operation, a different set of victims. There was an active warrant out of Nevada connected to a trafficking ring that had been dismantled 2 years ago. 3 operatives had been arrested in the raid. Leslie had disappeared before they could grab her. Blake brought the file to Austin and Tasha before they started the interrogation. All 3 of them read through it carefully, the implications becoming more disturbing with each page. This wasn't just child abuse. This was part of a larger pattern. The Nevada operation had targeted vulnerable young girls, grooming them for trafficking. 3 girls had been recovered during the raid, all of them between 12 and 15 years old. Leslie had been identified as one of the recruiters, the person who found targets and prepared them for sale. She'd been 1 step away from arrest when she vanished. Austin and Tasha entered the interview room with this information ready to use. Leslie looked up when they came in, her expression carefully neutral. She'd clearly decided to play the wronged stepmother, the woman trying her best with a difficult child. She started talking before they could, saying she wanted to explain what really happened, that Esther had behavioral problems that required strict discipline, that she'd been following her husband's instructions about how to handle his daughter. It was a rehearsed speech delivered with fake concern. Austin let her talk for 5 minutes before dropping the first bomb. He slid a photo across the table. Leslie's booking photo from an arrest in Texas 4 years ago under the name Carmine Baptiste. Leslie's careful expression cracked. She looked at the photo, then at Austin, then back at the photo. She said that wasn't her, that she didn't know who that person was. Tasha slid another photo across. This one was from a Nevada driver's license under the name Leslie Morton. Then another from Florida as Laura Selleck. Leslie's face went pale. The evidence kept coming. Bank records showing wire transfers to known trafficking operations. Phone records connecting her to people who were currently in federal prison for human trafficking. Witness statements from the Nevada case describing a woman matching her description, recruiting young girls. Austin laid it all out methodically, watching Leslie's composure dissolve piece by piece. He said they knew about Nevada, knew about the girls, knew what she really was. He said the DA was prepared to add kidnapping and trafficking charges to the child abuse if she didn't start talking. Leslie's lawyer voice kicked in. She said she wanted an attorney, that she wasn't saying anything else without representation. But Austin kept pushing, saying her best chance at any kind of deal was to cooperate now, that once the FBI got involved, there would be no deals left to make. He said Sam was already being contacted, that they'd be bringing him in for questioning, that one of them was going down for this, and the smart one would talk first. That got her attention. The idea that Sam might throw her under the bus before she could do it to him changed her calculation. She asked what kind of deal they were offering. Austin said it depended on what she told them and whether Sam was involved. Leslie laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. She said Sam was an idiot who knew nothing, that he'd been useful, but never actually involved in the real operation. She said she'd researched him for weeks before their meeting in Miami, found out everything about his marriage, his daughter, his weaknesses. She said the affair had been entirely strategic, that she never felt anything for him except contempt for how easy he was to manipulate. Tasha leaned forward and asked what the real operation was. Leslie looked between them, weighing her options, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she started talking. She said her ring targeted vulnerable girls in unstable home situations. Daughters of single fathers were best because single fathers were desperate for help and easy to manipulate. They'd identify a mark, research his situation, then insert someone into his life who could gain access to his daughter. The goal was grooming, breaking down the girl's resistance, isolating her from support systems, making her dependent and compliant. Austin asked how long Esther had before they planned to move her. Leslie said 6 months from the wedding, which meant they were almost there. She said the plan was to stage a runaway, make it look like Esther had left on her own because she couldn't handle her new family situation. Sam would file a missing person report, but they'd make sure the investigation went nowhere. By the time anyone figured out something was wrong, Esther would be gone. Moved through a network of safe houses, sold to the highest bidder, disappeared into a system that swallowed children whole. The detectives pressed for names. Who else was in the operation? Where were the safe houses? Who were the buyers? Leslie said she wanted immunity before she gave up her partners. Austin said that wasn't his call, that the FBI would handle that negotiation. He asked if Sam knew any of this. Leslie laughed again and said, Sam barely knew what day it was. She said he'd destroyed his own wife for an affair, handed his daughter over without question, accepted every excuse about discipline and structure without ever checking on Esther himself. She said Sam was a useful idiot, nothing more. But then she said something that made both detectives pause. She said Sam helped with the setup against Nia, knew about the cameras, knew about the AI photo. She said he was complicit in destroying his wife's credibility so that Leslie could have unrestricted access to Esther. Austin asked if Sam knew about the trafficking. Leslie said no, said Sam. Thought he was just winning a custody battle, that he had no idea what he'd really signed up for. But she was willing to say he did know, willing to implicate him in everything if it meant a better deal for herself. Blake was in the observation room taking notes when his phone rang. It was the officer he'd sent to contact Sam in Atlanta. Sam had just landed after a 2-week business trip and was being detained at the airport. He was confused and panicked, insisting he didn't understand what was happening. Blake told the officer to bring him in, that they needed him for questioning immediately. Sam would be back in the city in 3 hours. That gave them time to decide how much of Leslie's story they believed and how they'd approach Sam's interrogation. While they waited for Sam, forensics finished processing the house. They found no food residue in Esther's room or bathroom, confirming prolonged deprivation. They found the combination to the refrigerator lock written on a sticky note in the master bedroom. They found search history on Leslie's laptop about child trafficking prices and overseas buyers. They found burner phones with encrypted messages that they'd need specialists to decode. Every piece of evidence painted a picture of systematic abuse and trafficking preparation. The medical report came through while Sam was in transit. Esther weighed 68 pounds, down from 102 pounds 5 months ago. She was severely dehydrated with electrolyte imbalances that could have caused heart failure. She had bruises in various stages of healing on her arms and back. She showed signs of prolonged psychological trauma, including dissociation, and learned helplessness. The doctor's notes said another week of this treatment might have killed her. That changed the charges from child abuse to attempted murder. Sam arrived at the police station in handcuffs, still wearing his business clothes from the Atlanta office, looking completely lost. They put him in a different interview room from Leslie, let him sit there for 30 minutes wondering what was happening. Austin and Tasha reviewed their strategy. Sam wasn't a trafficker. He was an accomplice to abuse through willful ignorance. The question was whether he deserved criminal charges or was just a man who'd made catastrophically bad choices. They started the interrogation gently, asking Sam when he'd last seen Esther. He said 2 weeks ago before his trip that she'd seemed fine. They asked if he'd noticed her weight loss. He said kids go through phases, that Leslie said Esther was just picky about food. They asked if he'd talked to Esther during his trip. He said he called every other day, but Leslie said Esther was usually busy with homework or activities. He'd accepted that because he trusted his wife. Then they showed him the photo Phyllis had taken. Sam stared at it for a full minute without speaking. His face went from confused to horrified to sick. He asked if that was really Esther, if the photo was recent. Austin said it was taken 2 days ago by a concerned neighbor. Sam said that couldn't be right, that his daughter didn't look like that Leslie said everything was fine. Tasha said Leslie had been lying, that Esther had been systematically starved and abused for months while Sam was traveling for work. Sam's hands were shaking when he put down the photo. He asked where Esther was, if she was okay, if he could see her. Austin said she was in the hospital, that Nia was with her, that Sam wasn't going anywhere near her until they figured out what he knew. Sam said he didn't know anything, that he trusted Leslie with his daughter, that he never would have left if he'd known. Tasha asked why he didn't know, Why he never checked. Why he accepted every excuse without question. Sam broke down. He said he'd been so focused on winning the custody battle and starting his new life that he didn't pay attention to the details. He said Leslie seemed good with Esther at first, that he thought discipline was healthy, that he never imagined it could go this far. He said he called home regularly, but Leslie always had reasonable explanations for why Esther couldn't talk. He said he was traveling for work, trying to earn money, trusting his wife to handle things at home like she promised she would. Austin asked about the setup against Nia. Did Sam know about the trafficking? Sam said absolutely not, said he would never put his daughter in danger like that. Austin said, but he did put her in danger, that his choice to trust Leslie over protecting Esther had nearly killed his child. Sam vomited into the trash can next to the interview table. Tasha got him water and let him compose himself. When he could speak again, he kept saying he didn't know, that if he'd known he would have stopped it, that he never meant for any of this to happen. The detectives pressed harder. They told him about Leslie's real identity, about the trafficking ring, about the plan to sell Esther. Sam's face went white. He said Leslie was a model, that they met at a conference, that she loved him. Austin said Leslie researched him for weeks before their meeting, that everything was planned, that Sam was a mark from the beginning. Sam looked like someone had physically struck him. The affair he'd destroyed his marriage for had been fake from the start. The woman he'd trusted with his daughter was a predator who'd been preparing to traffic her. Leslie was brought back into her interview room for a final statement. Austin told her Sam was cooperating, that he'd confirmed everything about the setup. Leslie saw through the bluff immediately and laughed. She said Sam didn't know enough to confirm anything, that he was too stupid to be involved in the real operation. She said sure, he helped destroy Nia's credibility, but he thought he was just winning custody. She said he had no idea about Nevada, no idea about the trafficking, no idea what his new wife actually did for a living. She said Sam was a useful idiot, and now he was a useless one. Austin asked one more time about her operation. Leslie said she'd talked to the FBI, not local cops, that she wanted a real deal before she gave up her network. She said 4 other operatives were still working, still targeting families, still preparing children for sale. She said if the FBI wanted those names and locations, they'd need to offer her something substantial. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled, like this was all just business, like children's lives were negotiable commodities. The FBI took over the case that afternoon. Federal agents arrived and took custody of Leslie, reading her rights on trafficking charges that carried life sentences. They took Sam's statement, but decided not to charge him with trafficking involvement. He'd be charged with child endangerment and criminal negligence for failing to protect his daughter, but they believed he hadn't known about Leslie's real operation. That didn't make him innocent. It just made him willfully blind, which was its own kind of guilt. Later that day, prosecutors went through Leslie's belongings and found divorce papers. She'd filed to end her marriage to Sam 2 weeks before CPS showed up. She'd been planning her exit, preparing to disappear again before the operation was discovered. Sam had been so focused on his business trip that he didn't even know his second marriage was over. He'd lost everything. His career would be destroyed by the charges, his daughter would never forgive him, and the woman he'd sacrificed everything for had been using him from the start. Esther spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. Nia stayed by her side constantly, sleeping in the chair next to the bed, eating meals from the hospital cafeteria, taking personal leave from her nursing job to be present. Geneva brought clothes and toiletries, handled the logistics, made sure Nia took care of herself while she took care of Esther. The first few days were critical. Esther's body so depleted that doctors worried about refeeding syndrome, a dangerous condition that can happen when someone severely malnourished starts eating again too quickly. The physical recovery was slow but steady. Esther gained 3 pounds the first week, 4 pounds the second week. Color returned to her face gradually. Her hair stopped falling out once proper nutrition resumed. The IV fluids fixed the dehydration and electrolyte imbalances that had put her at risk for cardiac arrest. But the physical healing was easier than the psychological recovery. Esther had night terrors that woke the entire pediatric ward, screaming about being locked in her room, about being hungry, about Leslie coming back. She couldn't eat without Nia present, panicking if her mother left even to use the bathroom. She flinched at loud noises and sudden movements, trauma responses from months of living in fear. While Esther recovered physically, the legal system moved with unusual speed. Julian filed an emergency custody motion the day after CPS removed Esther, citing the photographic evidence, the medical reports, and the criminal charges against Leslie. He requested an immediate hearing to restore Nia's custody and terminate Sam's parental rights. The court scheduled it for 2 weeks later, which was lightning fast compared to normal custody proceedings. Judge Brenneman would preside, the same judge who'd stripped Nia of custody 5 months earlier. Julian worried about that, wondering if pride would prevent the judge from admitting he'd been wrong. The hearing took place in the same courtroom where Nia had lost everything. She sat at the defendant's table with Julian, wearing professional clothes Geneva had bought for the occasion, trying to look stable and competent. Across the aisle, Sam sat alone without Victoria Caldwell or any legal team. He'd fired them after realizing they'd helped him destroy his family for a lie. He looked broken, his expensive clothes wrinkled, his hair unwashed, his face showing the kind of defeat that comes from knowing you've lost everything that mattered. Judge Brenneman entered and everyone stood. He looked older than he had 5 months ago, the weight of a failed decision visible in his posture. He said this hearing would address the emergency motion to restore custody to Nia Fletcher and determine appropriate placement for the minor child. He said he'd reviewed the CPS reports, the medical records, and the police evidence. He said what happened to Esther Fletcher was one of the most severe cases of child abuse he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. Julian presented his case methodically. He called Phyllis Grant to testify about the night Esther came to her house starving and terrified. Phyllis described Esther's skeletal appearance, her desperate consumption of sandwiches, her fear of Leslie finding out. She presented the photo she'd taken, which was entered as evidence. Julian asked why she'd taken the photo, and Phyllis said because she knew someone needed to see proof of what was happening, that people don't believe things they can't see with their own eyes. The CPS report was entered next, Donna Reyes testifying about what she'd found at the Fletcher residence. She described the bare bedroom, the diary, the locked pantry and refrigerator. She said in 11 years of child welfare work, she'd never seen such systematic deprivation. She said Esther was 68 pounds when removed from the home, that medical professionals estimated she was days away from organ failure. She said if Phyllis Grant hadn't taken that photo and sent it to Nia, Esther Fletcher would likely be dead. Julian called Nia to testify last. She took the stand and told her story from the beginning. The affair, the setup, the AI photo, the arrest, the custody battle she couldn't win because Sam had more money and better lawyers. She explained how the court had called her violent and unstable for reacting to her husband's betrayal. She described completing every requirement, doing everything asked of her, while Sam cut off all contact between her and Esther. She said she'd known something was wrong, but had no way to prove it until Phyllis sent that photo. Judge Brenneman asked Nia directly if she accepted responsibility for her actions during the incident that led to her arrest. Nia said yes, she'd reacted emotionally and destructively, but that her reaction was to a deliberate provocation designed to make her look unstable. She said she'd completed anger management, therapy, parenting classes, everything the court required. She said she'd proven she was stable and capable, and she was asking for the chance to protect her daughter the way she should have been allowed to all along. Sam was called to testify, but had nothing to say in his own defense. He admitted he'd failed to protect Esther, that he'd trusted Leslie without verifying she was telling the truth. He said he called home regularly but accepted excuses without pushing back, that he'd been willfully ignorant because confronting reality would have meant admitting he'd made terrible choices. Julian didn't even cross-examine him because there was nothing to challenge. Sam had already condemned himself with his own testimony. Judge Brenneman called a recess to review everything presented. Nia and Geneva sat in the hallway for 90 minutes, not talking, just waiting. Sam sat alone on the opposite side of the hall, not looking at anyone. When they were called back in, Judge Brenneman had notes in front of him and an expression Nia couldn't read. He started by addressing his own failure. He said he'd made his custody decision based on evidence that appeared compelling at the time, but that the evidence had been deliberately fabricated to mislead the court. He said the AI-generated photo was a warning about how technology could be weaponized in custody battles, that courts needed better tools to detect this kind of manipulation. He said he should have questioned the evidence more thoroughly, should have insisted on independent verification, should have been more skeptical of a case that seemed too one-sided. Then he ruled. Full legal and physical custody was immediately restored to Nia Fletcher. Sam's parental rights were suspended pending the outcome of his criminal trial, with no visitation allowed until a future review that would require significant evidence of rehabilitation. Esther's preference would be heavily weighted in any future decisions about her father's involvement in her life. The restraining order against Nia was dissolved. Every requirement and restriction was removed. Nia collapsed in her chair, covering her face, crying so hard her whole body shook. Geneva put her arms around her daughter and cried too. Julian packed up his files quickly, getting ready to draw up the paperwork before anyone could change their minds. Across the aisle, Sam put his head in his hands. He'd lost everything, and unlike Nia, he deserved it. After the hearing, Sam tried to approach Nia. He said they needed to talk, that he wanted to explain, that God had shown him his mistakes and he was ready to make things right. He said Nia was his true wife, that the marriage to Leslie didn't count because he'd been under spiritual attack by a Jezebel spirit. He said God would restore their marriage if she just forgave him and gave him another chance. He said he'd been deceived, but now he saw clearly and knew they belonged together. Nia stared at him like he was speaking a language she didn't understand. Then she found her voice, cold and final. She said he chose this, that he destroyed their family for a woman he barely knew. She said he didn't protect their daughter, that Esther nearly died because he was too busy with his affair and his business trips to notice she was being starved. She said forgiveness wasn't hers to give because what he'd done was unforgivable. She said they were not married, would never be married again, that she didn't care what his prayers or his God told him. Sam said God would restore them anyway, that she'd see the truth eventually, that their marriage covenant was unbreakable. Nia told him to stop, that she had no interest in his religious justifications for his horrible choices. She said he was not her husband, would never be her husband again, that she'd rather be alone forever than spend another minute with a man who could do what he'd done. Then she walked away with Geneva, leaving Sam standing alone in the courthouse hallway, calling after her about God's plan and spiritual warfare and restoration that would never come. Leslie's federal trial happened 4 months later. She was charged with child abuse, attempted human trafficking, conspiracy to commit trafficking, and a dozen other counts related to the Nevada operation. Federal prosecutors had built a case using her diary, her laptop records, her communications with known traffickers, and testimony from 3 girls recovered in the Nevada raid. The evidence was overwhelming. Leslie showed no remorse throughout the trial, treating it like a business negotiation gone wrong. During sentencing, the judge asked if she had anything to say. Leslie stood and said she was surviving, that all of them were just surviving in whatever way they could. She said the world was cruel, and she'd learned to be crueler. She said she didn't expect forgiveness or understanding, because people like the judge lived in different worlds from people like her. The judge responded that Leslie had preyed on children, manipulated families, and destroyed lives for profit. He said she deserved no mercy, and the court would grant none. He sentenced her to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Sam's criminal trial was simpler. He pleaded guilty to child endangerment and criminal negligence, accepting responsibility for failing to protect Esther. His lawyer argued that Sam was himself a victim of Leslie's manipulation, that he'd been used and deceived. The judge acknowledged that, but said being fooled didn't absolve Sam of his duty as a father. He sentenced Sam to 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years probation. Sam also lost his insurance license permanently, his career destroyed by the criminal conviction. The media coverage exploded after the trials. Headlines asked how the court system had gotten it so wrong, how a Judge had believed a man with hidden cameras over a woman reacting to betrayal. Naya's statement from the courthouse steps went viral, people sharing it and debating family court reform. Judge Brenneman faced an ethics investigation into his handling of the original custody case. New legislation was proposed to address the use of AI-generated evidence in court proceedings, requiring third-party verification and clear disclosure. Nia became an accidental advocate for family court reform. She gave interviews explaining what had happened, how the system had failed Esther, how many parents lost custody based on fabricated evidence and biased testimony. She said the courts needed better protections against manipulation, better tools to detect lies, better training to recognize when someone was being set up. She said her case was extreme, but the problems were systemic, affecting thousands of families every year. 2 years after getting Esther back, Naya met someone who changed her life again. His name was Owen Bradshaw. Owen had come into their lives a year after the custody was restored. He was a high school history teacher, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. Nia met him at a school event, started talking about their experiences with loss, found comfort in someone who understood what it meant to rebuild after devastation. He was gentle and patient with both Nia and Esther, never pushing, always steady. He didn't try to be Esther's father. He was just Owen, someone safe who cared about them both. They'd married quietly 6 months ago in Geneva's backyard with just close family present. Esther had been part of the ceremony, not as a daughter being given away, but as a person choosing this new family configuration. She called Owen by his first name, not Dad, and he never asked for anything different. They lived in a modest house across town from the old neighborhood, away from memories, starting fresh. Geneva visited twice a week, still keeping watch over the family she'd fought so hard to keep together. If this story shook you, it should. The tools that destroyed Naya's life are available to anyone. AI can create photos that look real. Spyware can delete evidence remotely. Hidden cameras can capture reactions without context. And family courts, overwhelmed and underfunded, make life-changing decisions based on incomplete information. The tactics Leslie used are being taught in dark corners of the internet. Traffickers are getting smarter, and the courts are still catching up. This channel exists to expose these stories, to shine light on cases the system wants to forget, to give voice to mothers, fathers, and children who were failed by institutions that claimed to help them. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's fighting their own custody battle, someone who thinks the system is fair when the reality is far more complicated. And if you've ever faced a system that didn't believe you, if you've ever been called unstable for reacting to manipulation, if you've ever lost something precious because someone with more money could afford better lies, leave a comment, share your story. Let other people know they're not alone, because your story matters, your experience matters, and the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, is always necessary. Don't forget to like this video too. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people, helps other victims realize they're not crazy, helps change happen slowly but surely. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for believing that truth deserves to be heard, even when it's painful. Stay safe out there.